Coming up in this episode of In Clear Focus,
we're in real trouble. What can I do to have the most impact I can on the climate crisis?
With good marketing, we will get better climate action. If you are a marketer, this is on you.
You're listening to In Clear Focus, fresh perspectives on the business of advertising, produced weekly by Big Eye, a strategy-led full-service creative agency growing brands for clients globally. Hello, I'm your host, Adrian Tennant, Chief Strategy Officer. Thank you for joining us today. The consequences of climate change became even more evident this year. We saw drought in the western United States, Africa's famine, Pakistan's floods, and record-breaking heat waves across Europe. The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change. Its goal is to limit global warming to a rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius, that's 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, in average global temperatures, compared to pre-industrial levels. Formally adopted by 196 countries in December 2015, the ultimate aim is to achieve a climate-neutral world by 2050. World leaders have been convening in the Egyptian vacation resort of Sharm el-Sheikh for 2 weeks of climate negotiations for the United Nations annual conference, this year known as COP27. Delegates face many challenges as the war in Europe and rising inflation contribute to a global energy crisis, making it even harder to cut greenhouse gas emissions. While it's clear that action needs to be increased to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, there is still hope that we can get there. Our guests today are innovators working in an emerging marketplace focused on carbon reduction. Dr. Toby Green is the co-founder and director of MyCarbon, a UK-based firm helping businesses and individuals accelerate the move to net zero and general sustainability. Toby is joining us from his office in London, England. And we're also joined by Dr. John Whittle, Director of Operations and Strategy at MyCarbon. Previously with the research firm Further, John is making his second appearance on In Clear Focus and joins us from his home in Cheshire, England. Toby and John, welcome to In Clear Focus.
Oh, hi. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Toby, I'd like to start with you. Can you define what net zero is?
I absolutely love this question. We actually ask it as an interview question to the applicants for our jobs here at MyCarbon because it's such a confusing one. There's so many different terms out there, like carbon neutral, net zero, climate positive, green, eco, this, that, and the other. So it is really easy to get muddled. So it's a great first question to have. When we quantify greenhouse gas emissions, when we calculate a business carbon emissions, we do so into 3 categories. You got your scope 1, which are your direct emissions, any emissions arising directly off your site. Scope 2, which are your indirect energy emissions. Really easy. These are just your energy bills, electricity, or if you're only district heating. And then you have scope 3, which are indirect other emissions. And this is essentially everything else across your value chain, from all your goods and services, your transportation, business travel, employee commuting, like your downstream effects as well. So I'll start with carbon neutral. To achieve that, you must know your scope 1 and your scope 2 emissions. And you have to offset these emissions with any type of carbon credit. So carbon credits are split up into avoidance-based and removal-based. The avoidance-based generally are a bit cheaper. And so for a carbon neutral, you just have to calculate your scope 1 and 2 and offset your scope 1 and 2. Now, for most businesses, this can be about 5% of total emissions. So you see that carbon neutral is actually really easy to achieve. Net zero, on the other hand, much more difficult. So net zero, you must know your scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And if you want to offset these emissions, you must use the more expensive type, the carbon removal credits. And that's where we get the net in net zero. So everything you've put into the atmosphere, you must remove to balance it out and get that net zero. Now, under SBTi guidance, which is the Science Based Target Initiative, their guidance is say, right, in order to actually make this feasible, you need to reduce your emissions as much as possible before then removing. So it's all about, we still really need to reduce. We need to prioritize that reduction of emissions before achieving net zero. But really, it's knowing your scope 1, 2, and 3, reducing them as much as possible, and then removing what you're putting into the atmosphere. So kind of long answer to quite a simple question.
Toby, you co-founded the company. What led you to establish MyCarbon?
So I took up a PhD at the University of Leeds in bioenergy, and this had a master's year attached to the front of it. To be honest, I wasn't super keen about, but I'm so glad it happened because I really got to learn about the wider context of climate change. And I knew what climate change was, I sort of knew of it, knew it was a thing. And it was during, I say, about the first 6 months of that year where I really became awakened to the climate crisis, where I had that moment of clarity. And it was, we're in real trouble. What can I do to have the most impact I can on the climate crisis? And I thought, do I stay in academia? I thought, no, it's a bit too blue sky thinking for me. Do I go into politics and policy? I'm not a politician, Adrian. So then it was going into the private sector, and it was trying to find, the need. And originally it was trying to focus on individuals, but then we pivoted towards businesses. But yeah, it was really just having that moment of clarity in the climate crisis and what can I do as an individual? Where's my skills? And from that, it was MyCarbon.
John, it's very nice to talk with you again. Last time you were on the podcast, we were discussing projective techniques for qualitative research conducted online. Now, on the face of it, this seems like quite a different role than the one you held previously. What led you to MyCarbon?
Yeah, my background is as a social scientist. So at my core, what I'm always fascinated in are the fundamental dynamics of social behavior. I have an element of psychology in my training, but group theory and how people respond in response to big events and small events and how they bond and create identities and then how they form structures and then how those structures work with agency. That's where I get my kicks, right? That's where I really love it, where I start to explore what people are doing in the face of these big things and how that filters down into their everyday actions. There is perhaps no bigger challenge in terms of understanding that than the climate crisis. We talk a lot in research, and when we discuss projective exercises, one of the things that fuels a projective exercise is moving beyond what people say to what they do. You're tapping into a different type of their brain. I think, again, we look at the climate crisis. We all know how bad it is. We all know really what we've got to do, and yet it's not happening. We know that governments have to make huge changes. I firmly believe if you gave people a choice, a very clear choice, moment by moment, and said, if you do A, this is going to affect the planet in this way, badly. If you do B, this is going to make it harder for you to do this, but it will, affect the planet in this way. I firmly believe people would choose B, but I don't think we've very clearly communicated that. So in terms of sort of the passion for it, that came about there. I was also reaching a point where, maybe rather cynically, maybe rather unpopularly, I was looking at a lot of the work that I was doing, and I felt increasingly like I was just putting money into the pockets of people who already had a fair amount of money, which happens. That's a natural part of the world. We live in a capitalist society. But I thought, I've done that. I want a bit of a new challenge. And Toby and Mike, who are the two co-founders, I've actually been best friends with for over a decade, really, at this point. And I'd in the background, because of my experience, because of the transferable skills, because of helping to grow a company, it was kind of one of those things where everything seems to align at once. And there was an opportunity to come in, to help, to be a part of that, to use those skills, and to tackle that challenge. So here I am, slightly different role, different industry, but still sort of bridging that gap with the social element.
So, John, what services does MyCarbon provide to businesses?
MyCarbon has quite a simple process, which is really good because the climate crisis and climate change, there's a lot of information out there and you can get lost quite easily. We like to boil it down into 3 stages of calculate, reduce, and offset. Toby's explained the scopes and what we look at there. And that is really, for anyone listening to this, as an employee, as a business person, as someone who knows a business person, the first step that you can really take is to calculate. You can't manage what you haven't measured. You have to have conducted that measurement process. So calculating those 3 scopes. From that, you can go to reduce or offset. Offsets can have a really bad name because unfortunately there are some people out there who are taking some liberties. They're trading in things that might not necessarily exist or purport to do the things they say they do. But there are some really good offsetting schemes out there. And offsets are where you are using an initiative like Toby's spoken about, like capture, to take carbon out of the atmosphere. There are a number of different ways you can do it. Some are technological, some are natural, some are biological. And you're paying for an initiative that is taking that carbon out over a certain period of time. That's really good in a way, but there is only actually a certain amount of offsetting we can ever do. Because if you're looking at nature-based solutions, there's only a certain amount of nature on the planet. The planet is a finite resource. And also some of these technologies are in their infancy. The key bit and the hardest bit, as Toby's alluded to with the net zero, is the reduction element. Reducing, changing the actual logistical processes, the production processes, the manufacturing. That's really what we need to do. That's what a lot of our governments are kicking their heels on, if I'm honest with you. People love offsets. Most people will pay anything to assuage, guilt, a Catholic guilt, to feel like they checked it off their balance sheets. Actual long-term change where you are substituting a manufacturing process, you are using a different material, you are implementing from the ground up a brand new way of doing something, that's the challenge. But that is actually what we need to do more of. But as I said earlier, it's a very different case of saying it and doing it, because it is a complete systematic ground up reversal in a lot of ways of what we're doing.
Toby, when we were chatting a couple of weeks ago about what topics we might want to cover during this discussion, you commented on Tesla's reliance on credits from a carbon offsets. Could you explain this for us in non-technical terms, please?
So a carbon credit, for starters, represents 1 ton of carbon dioxide, either being avoided from entering the atmosphere or being removed from the atmosphere. So 1 credit equals 1 ton. Now, we currently have 2 different marketplaces for carbon credits. You have the voluntary carbon credit market, and then you have the compliance carbon credit market. The compliance market is for companies of a certain size that have emission caps, like car manufacturers, for example. So for carbon credits to be a credit, there must be a degree of additionality. It must be against business as usual. That is, and usually quite a costly thing. So the carbon credit, therefore, gives economic incentive to do that thing that isn't otherwise normally done, as it were. Now, really, before electric cars, the only thing I can think of is the quite buggy Nissan Leaf, like the old school one. So Tesla really brought the electric car, I think, to the mass market and made it sexy as well. That's what we need in sustainability. We need more sex appeal. And so Tesla were getting awarded carbon credits in the compliance market because their cars didn't have any tailpipe emissions. Whereas, say, Ford, a lot of their cars have these tailpipe emissions. They all get measured as part of Ford's ESG, their governance, and they still have to be underneath an emissions cap. If Ford's goes over this emission cap, they must buy from the compliance market, bring them under. Now, for Tesla, they might have an emission cap of X, but because all of their cars aren't producing these tailpipe emissions, means they got to sell these credits effectively back to the compliance market and makes themselves viable. Without the carbon credits, Tesla would never have been viable. It was only last year Tesla first ever made a profit without the sale of carbon credits. So that's more on the compliance market. And then if you go to the voluntary side, it's setting up biochar projects. It's carbon capture storage on sort of big levels where these projects just aren't feasible at all without additional income. And that is the whole purpose of carbon credits.
Toby, what does a client's engagement with MyCarbon typically look like? What does embarking on a journey toward net zero typically consist of?
I mean, predominantly, you get some wonderful meetings with myself and John. And it really is quite a holistic approach. We love to really engage with who we're working with. And within that, it's education. We really want our clients to understand the journey that they're going through. So a client generally comes to us being like, we want to be sustainable, but we don't know what we do. We start off, right, we need to calculate your carbon footprint. So that's the starting point. And then depending on who the client is, the big company, small company, that's where we then say, right, this is the strategy for your reductions. Are we going to do a full-on net zero roadmap? Or if you're a smaller business, can we just give you some good advice, structured advice on what you can do to reduce? And then it's the offsetting piece as well. So we always like to say, be carbon neutral along your journey to net zero. So it's not necessarily about splashing out millions of pounds on removals today, but it's about what can you do to mitigate your impact on the climate crisis? And then how do we change that as we go to net zero?
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back after these messages.
I'm Sandra Marshall, VP of Client Services at Big Eye. Every week, In Clear Focus addresses topics that impact our work as advertising professionals. At Big Eye, we always put audiences first. For every engagement, we're committed not just to understanding our clients' business challenges, but also learning about their prospects and customers' attitudes, behaviors, and motivations. These insights inform our strategy and collectively inspire the account, creative, media, and analytics teams working on our clients' projects. If you'd like to put Big Eye's audience-focused consumer insights to work for your brand, please contact us. Email info@bigeyeagency.com. Big Eye, reaching the right people in the right place at the right time.
Each month, in partnership with our friends at Kogan Page, the Big Eye Book Club features interviews with authors who are experts in marketing, consumer research, and customer experience. Our featured book for November is Inclusive Marketing: Why Representation Matters to Your Customers and Your Brand by Jerry Dakin. In Clear Focus listeners can save 20% on a print or electronic version with exclusive promo code BIGEYE20. This code is valid for all products and pre-orders and applies to Kogan Page's free ebook offer. To order your copy of Inclusive Marketing, go to koganpage.com. That's KOGANPAGE.com. Welcome back. I'm talking with Dr. Toby Green and Dr. John Whittle of MyCarbon, which helps businesses and individuals accelerate the move to net zero and general sustainability. When it comes to consumers' attitudes towards sustainability and environmentally friendly products, the global research firm Kantar has been tracking the behaviour of a segment it calls eco-actives across 24 countries. Its latest report finds that eco-active households have grown from 16% in 2019 to 22% in 2021. These consumers care about how brands affect the environment, and one of their most consistent concerns is the environmental impact of plastic waste, especially from packaging. John, as a social scientist with experience in marketing research, you know that there's often a difference between what someone says in a survey and how they make decisions in real life. In what kinds of ways can marketers bridge this knowing-doing gap?
Yeah, I love surveys like this because when I'm a research director or designing them, self-reported data to me is interesting. I think previously marketing teams were almost worried to even consider climate change or the climate crisis for fear of the fact that people would just poo-poo it. They go, oh, that's not a thing. And then they get so irritated that this brand would be deeming to having a conscience, particularly after the last 12 months. I don't feel like that's going to be there. We are finding actually that in many of the companies we work with, it's the marketing directors and the marketers who are being given this task of, well, we think sustainability is really important. So here you go. You need to deal with it. And not only do you need to deal with the messaging, but you need to deal with the initiatives behind it as well. And we get quite a lot of marketing directors come to us going, I've got no clue. Like, what do we say? What do I avoid? What do I not avoid? What do we need to do internally? Because again, this is one of those things where you can't preach about it unless you've done it. Toby has a great term of green hushing rather than green washing. And green hushing is where actually you avoid any mention.
I didn't coin that term, just for reference.
You raised it to our attention. I think it's such a key term, which is where, you are hiding your eco sins as they were, or even just deliberately avoiding talking about this in your messaging because you are so worried. And so one of the things we do is we support a lot of marketing teams on what they can and cannot say. Obviously, a large part of that is making sure that they have got their house in order a little bit. But in terms of particularly, say you've got your house in order and you want to talk about this and you want to talk about marketing, and make no mistake, marketers are really key in this, actually. They're actually one of the most important things. With good marketing, we will get better climate action. If you are a marketer, this is on you as much as it's on us. We need you. We need your skills. Your skills are about engaging with people and getting them to do things. I think the biggest thing that we consider when we write our own messaging is we have a very careful blend of what I call a quarter shame, 3/4 pride. If you keep banging on about the negatives, people aren't going to do anything. They're going to feel depressed and they're not going to be happy. But you need a little bit of a core there to get people motivated. Pride, and when I mean pride, I'm talking about social norms. Okay, when people say and what they do individually is very different. When they're surrounded by other people, social norms are really powerful. In your marketing, if you think about social behaviors and how to make people accountable to others, about how to inspire them with the actions of pride, can they take pride in what they're doing? Can they take pride in your brand and your messaging and what you're doing? Are you able to display that you're on a journey where you've been very transparent, very honest, very accurate, and are you able to tie that in with your product and your campaign and bring those individuals along? Because people want to feel proud about this. They want to know that they should have been doing more, and there's that little bit of shame. But are they with you? Are you part of their journey to net zero, as it were? How do you include them? And it's that sort of medium of journeys, using that very careful mixture of shame and pride. That's how you move on, because it has that social element, it has that social accountability, and it moves away from just the glib, oh, of course I'm doing that, of course that's good for me.
Well, acknowledging the need to respond to the urgency of the climate crisis, the UK Advertising Association's Climate Action Group recently produced a report with recommendations known as the Ad Net Zero Initiative. It proposes action on 5 fronts, with supporters committing to curtail their carbon emissions by reducing travel, fossil energy use, and waste. Advertisers, agencies, and production companies commit to adopting tools and training to curb production emissions, while media agencies work with their clients to develop lower carbon media plans. And leveraging advertising's influence, agencies and clients commit to harnessing the power of their advertising to promote more sustainable consumer choices and behaviours. Well, worthy goals for sure, but focusing on that last statement about promoting more sustainable consumer choices and behaviours, John, do you foresee advertising strategy needing to focus on the kind of nudges associated with behavioural economics?
Yeah, Toby, Mike and I have always said, wouldn't it be nice if there was some sort of app that someone was going about their day? Think about washing, actually, and there's a really good example of this in the UK, like Ariel. Ariel pods, they say, really good at washing at 30. Because 30, it's 10 degrees less, it uses less energy, it's better for the environment. And actually, it's really funny that those campaigns, particularly in a cost of living crisis that we're all dealing with, they stick quite close in your mind. That's an example of marketing that is really good for their brand, because you think of Ariel, I could call it top of my head, and is good for the planet as well. We need those in a lot of areas of life. I think we need marketing teams to be thinking about their product and what are the right sustainable choices that they need to be doing, and how are they then communicated in a way that isn't judgmental, that isn't preachy, that brings people along. And it goes back to what I was saying before, it's how do you bring them along with the journey? And if you are, listening to this as someone who works on a marketing team or a marketing director who's been given this big sustainability burden, as I say, get your house in order, make sure you know the impact of your business, of your product, that you know where you need to improve, and that you've got a plan in place. And, we'd be very happy to help you. Once you've done that, what actually falls quite neatly out of that are marketing campaigns. We've worked with a lot of companies who have brand new products, and by reducing certain materials they've used, obviously, they can talk about that. Consumers are more interested now. They are making choices where they are siding with brands who are showing they're committed to making a change. By bringing them along with that, you then have a wealth of content that you can engage with them on, and that you can start to focus on and say, well, actually, choose this rather than that. And you start to become a part of their everyday life. It will encourage brand loyalty and things like that. And actually, listening to the net zero initiatives that you've got there, we actually do a lot of work where we help calculate the impact of specific events and specific products as well. We're always very conscious. We'd love to have gone to COP27, but we're big fans of traveling by train, not by plane, for the reasons, that are evident there. We're always thinking about that. But, in terms as well of sort of the advertising streams that people use, you'd be probably shocked at the actual impacts that a campaign has, often because of the servers that are used putting messages out there. And again, that's advice that we can consult on. But I say, thinking about where your product sits in someone's everyday life, what's the sustainability focused choice that you can help with, and how can you guide them? There's a lot of information out there in this day and age. I think the job of any good marketing team is to show that you are curating the experience of the user, of the audience, and that you're there with them day to day.
Toby, I'm curious about how you calculate individuals' and businesses' carbon footprints. Without going too deep into the math, how do you arrive at the numbers?
For a business, we're great because we've got standards. We've got the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and we've got ISO 14064 Part 1. And we'd always hear to the 5 key principles. We've got transparency, relevancy, accuracy, consistency, and completeness. Okay, so we've got the principles, we've got the standards, and then, as I said earlier, it's broken into your 3 scopes. But what does that actually mean? Yeah, how do you actually get to the numbers? So ideally, if we lived in an ideal world, we'd have a CO2 sensor that could measure every kind of emission being produced from any type of activity. So that's quite easy in manufacturing. If you've got a chimney, most of them have sensors, and you can measure directly the CO2 coming from that process. So that's the ideal, but that's quite rare that we can get that. So the next tier down is via a stoichiometric method, so via chemical equations. So for example, if you're working with breweries or distilleries, we know that there's a fermentation process that occurs. We can use the equation of alcohol production and of fermentation to chemically know how much CO2 is produced from the volume of alcohol that is produced. So that's kind of the next level down. But obviously, that can't happen every day with every kind of activity you do. So the next tier down is that we use emission factors based on activity data. Now, this is the most common one, and it is pretty accurate. So it means if we're working with this brewery, so they say, right, we bought 1,000 glass bottles for all of our beer. I go, right, well, how much did those glass bottles weigh? They say 1,000 kilograms. And then I use an emission factor that turns the weight of glass produced into a CO2. I times those 2 numbers together, and then I get a carbon footprint associated to the glass bottles. And then the second to last tier is we use an economic basis. So the brewery goes, oh, I spent £1 million on glass bottles. And I have to use a cost-based emission factor to determine £1 million into a footprint. The tricky one with that is I don't know, and the emission factor doesn't really know, is £1 million on glass bottles, is that 1 million glass bottles? Or is that 10 million glass bottles? There's a lot of fluctuation that can happen. So that's why we really try and lean away from cost-based. And then the final one is essentially just having a guess. Just using industry out, which we really, really, really try and avoid. So they're the type of tiers, and we always try our best to get the primary source of data. But might not always be the case. And again, each business is very different in how they store their data and what data they can provide us. So in the first year, we might be working a lot with cost base, because for financial reporting, companies generally have their ducks in a row with financial data. So then it's saying, okay, next year when we go through this process, you start collecting your data like this. And then again, it's putting in the steps to improve it. Not everyone is going to be perfect right away. And it's not about being perfect right away. It's about starting the journey. So that's with businesses. With individuals, there are no standards. Okay. So there are quite a few different carbon footprint calculators out there on the internet. Well, ours is obviously the best, but it's all about, there are no standards. It's about trying to include what an individual might do, but it's also got to be quite engaging so that the individual sticks through the calculation process. For our calculator, for example, when it comes to flight, we've not tried to say list every single flight and destination. It's more about, right, how many short haul, how many long haul, and then we've used quite average distances. just for that engagement.
Since the holiday season is now upon us, I wonder if you'd like to suggest a gift for someone fairly early on their journey toward net zero.
This is a fun question because we had this conversation at MyCarbon last week about gift giving. We want to treat our clients with nice gifts. So we had a scroll on the internet, sustainable hampers, this, that, and the other. And it all seemed to be a bit of a marketing hogwash. It was really difficult because they say they're eco-friendly, but why? Why are they eco-friendly? I had no idea what is actually eco-friendly about this product. It might be less environmentally harmful compared to a competitive product, but I don't know. There's no evidence to back up the claim. So actually, it's a difficult question. We went for a suggestion that kind of what I'd like to think would help more individuals adopt this sustainable practice. So we went with some bars of natural soaps, bars of shampoos, because that's quite a good one. Okay, not necessarily in terms of net zero, but it's a good one to reduce plastic from your homes. We have to take that into account, sustainability as well. So I thought that's a bit different. When I was a kid growing up, you always got a Lynx body set. So I think that's Axe in America. You get your deodorant, you get your body wash, and it's a lot of plastic, a lot of cardboard wrapping, whereas actually your little bar of soap, it's in a little cardboard. So try to adopt that practice at home. There's a great company out there called Two Drifters, and they produce rum. John said we're not allowed to buy our clients alcohol. So, but these are great because it's a rum and they've done the full life cycle assessment of their products. And they purchase carbon removals with a company called Climeworks, which are literally top of the tier in terms of carbon removals in this novel technology. So that's a company who's really done the homework to say, we were making this a sustainable rum. We've done our footprint. We've put in actions to reduce it. So they even bottle it in a special glass that's X% lighter than other glasses. They source sustainable materials. They've really worked hard at it. And there are other companies out there who have done the same. Don't just trust something that says it's sustainable. Have a little bit of due diligence. Are you actually? And if you're unsure, ask them the question to see what they come back with. Unless they're actually presenting on their website their credentials, they probably don't have any. So challenge them and do a little bit of homework on that.
Great. If In Clear Focus listeners would like to learn more about MyCarbon's work, where can they find information?
www.mycarbon.co.uk. Or, of course, please follow us on LinkedIn. There's the MyCarbon page, myself, Toby Green, John Whittle on LinkedIn. We're always producing fabulous content where I always like to say we're never trying to sell anything on LinkedIn. Are you trying to use it as an education platform? There are two ways.
Toby, thank you very much for being our guest on In Clear Focus.
You're incredibly welcome, Adrian. It's been a pleasure.
And John, thank you for being our guest again.
No problem. Thank you for having me. If I manage to get a third time, I hope I get a badge or something.
We'll see about that. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks to my guests this week, Dr. Toby Green, the co-founder and director of MyCarbon, and Dr. John Whittle, Director of Operations and Strategy at MyCarbon. You'll find a transcript with links to the resources we discussed today on the In Clear Focus page at bigeyeagency.com. Just select podcast from the menu. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider following us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to In Clear Focus, produced by Big Eye. I've been your host, Adrian Tennant. Until next week, goodbye.